So this is the second part of a talk. Last year I was presenting a talk on yeast, and this year I got this idea for this talk last year because of a cool thing somebody brought up. But I've been thinking a lot about the meaning of words recently. Like when Anna says, stick to your time, and I'm Irish, and I say, I will, yeah. Now, to non-native English speakers, I will, yeah, sounds like I will comply and I will stick to my time. But I'm Irish, and I will, yeah, means I probably won't, okay? It's the opposite. So if I say to Mark Roberts, nice hairdo, to most people that don't speak the English version or Irish version of English, they'll think, lovely, I've got a nice new haircut. And your week is made and you feel great. In Ireland, if an Irish person has bothered to say anything about your hairdo, it probably hasn't gone well for you. It's the equivalent of covering you in social urine and making you feel absolutely awful. So how we say things and in what context is really, really important. And here you can see plant fibre, a load of hot air. It's a full stop. It's not a question mark, okay? Because a load of hot air, maybe. But, it's a play on words because we all know some of the side effects of eating plant fibre, okay? As this little dog is demonstrating. But there is a lot to this. And coming back to the meaning of words, one of the things that came up last year is this question here. What is a pathogen? And it really depends on who's saying it to you and in what context, If this room was to talk about pathogens, you'd probably not be as alarmed about salmonella as maybe a vet. A vet thinks all salmonella is absolutely catastrophic, whereas in this room it mightn't be so bad. I used to be a pet food manufacturer, and dealing with the microbiology and discussing the issue with vets was always very, very complicated. But if I was to ask you guys, what does pathogen mean to you? Can somebody give me an idea? What does pathogen mean? Somebody shout out a definition of a pathogen. Nasty, okay, cool. Any more? Disease causing, okay, very good. Any more?
Something that's somewhere where it's not supposed to be.
Now we're getting there, okay. So they're all very common definitions of a pathogen, but it definitely depends on who you're talking to, what, where, when, why. So I did what everybody does. I go to ChatGPT and I ask it, what is a pathogen? This word pathogen that everybody's so terrified of. And the definition here would probably ring true for most people. A pathogen is any microorganism that causes disease in its host. And then it gives you the 5 groups. Bacteria like E. coli. And you go, E. coli is a pathogen? Are you serious? E. coli is essential. If you didn't have E. coli in your guts in some forms, you would have a lot more oxygen in your guts. And then your anaerobic bacteria will suffer. If you take antibiotics to squish the E. coli, you'll get more yeast. If you take drugs to squish the yeast down, you get more E. coli. E. coli communicates with our immune system, helps at the gut membrane barrier. Yes, a few strains can put you on your butt, absolutely. And those strains come from the inappropriate rearing of animals. If we just left the cows out in the fields to eat normal food and the chickens to peck around outside, we wouldn't have some of these really nasty strains. They come from the inappropriate feeding of animals. Grass-fed animals might have 300 times less of these pathogenic bacteria than when they're grain finished. So E. coli is a pathogen, is it really? Only in certain circumstances. Salmonella, the same thing. Thousands of strains of salmonella. There's only 1 or 2 you need to worry about. And the rest of them are almost certainly doing something useful. We just haven't discovered what exactly they do. Some of them beneficial. And then fungi, Candida is a pathogen. Candida's not a pathogen. It's got this bad reputation, which hopefully I put to bed last year, because nobody wants a yeast infection. Nobody wants thrush. And so it's got this really bad reputation. But if you didn't have any yeast in your guts, I hope you understand now, it'd be a bad time for you. You need yeast. They're a really important part of the biome. So you could do this with viruses. What really are viruses at the end of the day? When do colds and whatnot hit us and why? The whole virus debate is very hot. A rabbit hole I don't want to go down because it'll just consume me. Only people like Robin will probably understand it because I don't. And then you get into parasites, gut worms. And this is actually This is a probiotic. It's called Escherichia coli van Nissel 1917. And it was discovered in the trenches that some German soldiers weren't dropping dead of dysentery. And so this scientist, or whatever medical guy was looking after them, discovered to try to root through their poo and find out what was going on with their guts, that they could be a little bit immune from the dysentery. And he found a species of E. coli, and he put his name on it, and they're still using that today in Germany. So when you say E. coli is a pathogen, what do you mean? But in particular, this word microorganism, I mean, a gutworm isn't a microorganism. There is lots of animals that can be pathogenic to the environment if they are allowed to get in the wrong numbers. For example, in the image on the left in Yellowstone National Park, these deer were allowed, these elk were allowed, roam the national park in Yellowstone unmolested by wolves, 10,000 of them, and they decimated the landscape. They eat absolutely everything. They stop grass growing and trees. They keep out all the biodiversity that's needed there. They release 100 wolves after them, and in a few years, they change the landscape of Yellowstone National Park. Check out the images of the before and afters. Unbelievable. The grass comes back, and then the trees come back, and then beavers come along, nong, 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 and eat the trees, and then they build dams for some reason, and insects and birds and everything comes back. Would you say that deer on the left was a pathogen on the landscape? It's certainly causing dis-ease in the environment. And if an enormous, omnipotent being was to look at Earth, what would it think was the pathogen on the surface of Earth? You know what I mean? Here we are eating everything, pooing everywhere, outcompeting any animal near us. We are a pathogen on Earth, but we're not a microorganism. So who is viewing it and at what time is really, really important. I like the way God here fell for the whole mask thing as well. Even he's a bit of a dummy. But a more correct definition of a pathogen is really any organism in the wrong place at the wrong time in the wrong numbers. Anything can be a pathogen, but just to throw E. coli under the bus and yeast under the bus and salmonella is idiotic. You've got to start working with these things as opposed to just saying pathogen and making sure all our food is sterile. That is idiotic. That is no way for gut health, and we've now got the studies to show that. So if we don't know what a pathogen is, I've done a backflip myself on what's a probiotic. Now we know taking too much of the same probiotic over 6 months can induce a dysbiosis. People constantly, I'm going to drink gallons of kefir every day. What's the long-term benefit of that? Short-term, if you've got gut problems, probiotics are great. But now we are showing that if you keep taking probiotics after antibiotics, it takes the patient longer for their gut flora to get back to normal. The probiotics throw it out a little bit. The longer-term studies for probiotics are very, very interesting. What do we know is going on in there? We don't know anything. 80% of it, we haven't a clue. Dark matter. So taking probiotics is, what is a probiotic is another question. And today we're going to talk about what is a prebiotic. And in particular, we're going to be talking about plant fibre. So up until I saw a video by a guy called Paul Mason, I just thought plant fibre was a vital part of our whole setup. And if you were to question people and ask them, what is it you guys think plant fibre does for the body? People are going to throw out various ideas. Important for your digestion, and nutrient absorption, and that's very important. And prebiotic for diarrhea cases, which is one. Constipation is a big one. That's the doozy. And then chronic gut conditions and improving colon cancer. If you don't get plant fibre, you get colon cancer, said Burkitt in 1950. And since then, we've just accepted that. Plant fibre reduces colon cancer, doesn't it? Has anyone seen a study to support that statement? So this is a serious rabbit hole, and thankfully, this was last year. Do you remember we were talking about carnivore fibre? So for those that, mightn't know, there's a few different types of carbohydrates. You've got simple, you've got your complex carbohydrates. That just gets a bit longer, so single sugar units like sugar and fruit juice and whatnot. Complex carbohydrates, your starchy stuff, and your fibre. And you have two types of fibre, soluble and insoluble fibre, okay? When you look at the back of a packet of dry pet food, they're only telling you the insoluble fibre content. So some of those light dry foods, 10, 12% insoluble fibre, you can double that for a fibre content because it's usually at least the equivalent in soluble fibre as well, again. So that's how much of that product the dog can't digest itself. Okay. And And in these two groups, look, one on the top is soluble fibre. It's called soluble. It dissolves in water, so you get that gel, that gloop, and it's fantastic for your gut flora. Gut flora love that gloopy stuff. And they digest it because you can't. You haven't got the enzymes to break down soluble or insoluble plant fibre, but bacteria do for the soluble fibre. And if you eat lots of soluble fibre, it slows the passage of digestion through your guts. And insoluble fibre doesn't dissolve in water. Bacteria can't really eat it, but we believed until today that it serves vital roles in stool formation. And if you don't get insoluble plant fibre, crude fibre into your guts, you're gonna have a hard time going to the toilet. It also slows the passage of digestion, but then speeds it through the colon, in the belief that it absorbs water in the colon just through osmosis, just from being there, it draws water into the stool, and so you poo easier, is the thing we've been sold until today. Slowing the rate of digestion boosts nutrient absorption. Everybody says that. I'll just come back to this. Soluble fibre does the same thing in dogs as it does in us. So the previous slide we said it slows the passage of digestion. It slows the passage of digestion in dogs. It increases the amount of intestinal contractions because they have to work that food. And insoluble fibre like cellulose slows things down in the dog by as much as 900% in parts of the small intestine. So that is seriously slowing down how well the dog absorbs and on what we're being told is that will increase nutrient absorption. The longer the dog can hold on to the food, the more nutrients he'll get from it. Everybody knows the shape of a dog, and he's got a very rapid throughput system. So I wonder, is that true? And yet, we've got all these studies to show it's not. Raw-fed dogs enjoy greater digestibility and improved nutrient absorption when they're fed real food. Now, there's way more good quality nutrients in real food, and poor quality nutrients are hard to absorb. But it doesn't hold here that feeding plant fibre is necessary. Raw-fed dogs get less plant fibre because kibble is largely a plant-based product, loads of soluble fibre from the grains, and then loads of insoluble fibre. Raw-fed dogs get significantly less. So they definitely don't need the fibre in there. They don't need the passage of digestion to slow down like we do. We have a slightly different setup here where we're trying to slow things down so the bacteria have time to ferment our higher plant diets, but that's not dogs. So when they tell you that's what dogs need for that reason, it's just not true. We know that various fibre sources decreases how well the dog can reabsorb taurine because you're trying to reabsorb those bile acids. But the more plant fibre you put in there, the harder it is for the dog to reabsorb the bile acids, and the dog gets less taurine. And for a cat and for dogs, with all this DCM that's been going around since the 70s, it's a big, big problem. So another nutrient they say plant fibre is vital for is butyrates and fatty acids. The bacteria get the fibre, and then they ferment it, and then you get fatty acids. Really important for butyrates. And this is just picking on the NHS, not to distrust anything the NHS would say about health or diet. You see here in their fibre section of their guts website, it's important for short-chain fatty acid production. If you don't feed them fibre, you're going to get less short-chain fatty acids. There's the NHS saying the same thing. In the gut, fibre is fermented by the microbiome to form short-chain fatty acids. Very important for fatty acids, isn't it? And yet, this is how it works. This is your cow, and your cow, cows don't digest the grass themselves. I'm sorry if this is a simplistic kind of thing people most likely notice, but cows eat grass, but they don't digest the grass. They have this enormous stomach. We call, the first room is called the rumen. We call it the tripe. And they feed all that grass, and they warm it up and sluice it up, and they feed it to the bacteria. They farm bacteria. And the bacteria produce cellulase and enzymes that mammals can't. And they break down the grass, and they produce loads of butyrates. And the cow absorbs the butyrates and uses those. Doesn't use the grass itself. It's harvesting what the gut flora are producing and uses the butyrates and turns them into ketones. And that's how she grows that big. Grass is a notoriously terrible food substrate to be eating, but that's how they do it. Very, very clever. But we know that feeding dogs more meat-based products produce more short-chain fatty acids. So these animals don't need plant fibre to produce short-chain fatty acids. That is nonsense. The studies show the opposite. The more you feed them meat and whatnot, they produce more short-chain fatty acids. So they're fermenting products. They've got bacteria, they're fermenting products, but it's not plant fibre that's doing it. So when dry food companies and hospitals are telling you that you need good, plant fiber for short-chain fatty acids. It's just not the case. Okay, you can do it from meat because there is fiber in meat, as I'm about to show you. The other problem with cows, this is a little side note, and you'll have to forgive me here, Anna, because I just have to say one little comment about this. The whole problem with cows, we're told, is that they fart, and burp particularly. Lots more burps than there is farts. But they do it a lot because they're fermenting huge amounts of poor quality substrate, and the bacteria fart, and then she's got to let that gas out or explode. And so it's a strange little thing that cows are being blamed for, the changing of the weather these days. It's a very odd situation. And I just want to pop this slide up. I'll be very quick. Bill Gates, fantastic scientist. Cows are a big problem for the earth and carbon dioxide and whatnot. And there's just a little example of one trip in a private jet. One trip. He takes a trip every day in his private jet, 360 a year. And he's really worried about carbon, Bill Gates, and hates cows. He's the biggest crop grower in the US. Okay, he only grows grain, and he's a staunch advocate for that sort of diet. Although loves cheeseburgers, which come from, I'm sure, his grain. But so just one little trip in the Gulf Stream jet. I just picked a random island in the Bahamas that billionaires like to go to, and it's nearly 6,000 kilometers round trip. It's 8,000 gallons of juice to get there, and it's the equivalent of nearly 80 tons of carbon dioxide into the air, which is unbelievable. Compare that to the lowly cow. In farts and burps, she puts out about 12.4 kilos of carbon dioxide per day, but she sequesters 10 kilos of it. They forget about that bit. She poos it into the soil. Where do you think your soils come from? She builds the soils as opposed to deplete the soils with monocrop agriculture and spraying them with chemicals, fertilizer that requires carbon to make it. So she's only putting out about 2.4 kilos of carbon dioxide a year. Just to make that into some sort of round figure, that's the equivalent of one trip in one day on a private jet to the Bahamas and back to LA is the equivalent of about 32,000 cows, which is 105 enough calories and protein for 105 million Americans per day. So the whole carbon thing is a bit strange with cows that they're getting blamed for that. It's a really vital addition. The reason I'm mentioning the carbon bit is because this is the next thing that they're going to use for raw dog food. They're going to push that carbon thing very, very hard. You can see it's already sneaking in. It was pathogens, but we're fighting that one back. And the next thing, it's going to be good for the environment. Vegan pet food. It's good for the environment. Think of the children. It's like, word, vegan pet food is good for the environment. Let's go through the carbon insult. So we need to get ready for that. For anybody that's writing or engaging with people, if that starts coming up, you need to get ready with your factoids on that. And if you're not aware of it because you've been listening to the wrong news sources, I would read up because you've been misled. Okay, the main problem with the gas being produced by fermenting bacteria, obviously here, is bloat. Okay, and bloat is a savagely painful disease, and it is, it takes out pedigree dogs en masse. 1 in 10 of them are going to experience it, and large percentages of some breeds will die of it if they get it. Can you imagine the pain of it? And they know that fermentation gas is coming up from the intestines because they measured it. It's carbon dioxide. And so they know it's coming up from the intestines from the inappropriate food stuff that the dog is being fed most likely, such as a high fibre diet. And as again, these light dry foods would be the problem number one. That is public enemy number one. These light dry foods that are shown to induce nutritional deficiency in the dogs because they can't absorb the crap that's in it. But the big problem is the fibre is going to cause fermentation gas. If you have a deep-chested dog, I highly recommend you don't feed them a whole heap of plant fibre. It increases flatus in dogs, the same way as it does in us. And adding meats to the diet reduces it. It's not a surprise. So from a digestion and nutrient absorption point of view, how much time have I got? If plant fibre is not where it's at. A useful prebiotic in diarrhea cases, I'll give it that. There are studies to show if you add in soluble plant fibre to puppies with terrible diarrhea, it can help with those dogs. So I'll just give it a tick for that because I'm just not going to go into the study. Relieves constipation. Thank you, Paul Mason, for this study. This is from his YouTube channel, Low Carb Down Under. He's a great presenter. Check it out. And these next few slides are all thanks to him, and I've used a couple of them. Relieves constipation. We've known for 20 years that plant fibre has got nothing to do with relieving constipation. We've known for 20 years a diet poor in fibre should not be assumed to be the cause of chronic constipation. We've known for 20 years the studies don't show that. Plant fibre, the lack of it, doesn't increase constipation in humans. The studies don't show that at all. And the reason for that is because there's lots of different types of constipation. You can be constipated for a lot of different reasons. One of them is dietary. Okay, so if you're eating a ridiculously high carbohydrate diet that doesn't have any meat in it or any crude plant fibre, okay, you're going to get constipated. So if you just eat bread, you're going to get constipated. But if you mix in things with fibre in that, you'll be fine. Okay, that's reason number one. But look at all the other reasons for constipation. There's 10. 3 of them I didn't understand, so I just didn't put them on it in case somebody asked me a question. But there's lots of reasons why you get constipation. So plant fibre is nothing to do with those bottom 5. Giving a patient in those bottom 5 more plant fibre is definitely not what you would do. It's actually going to aggravate the condition, as I'm going to show you. So this is the study that Paul Mason showed me, which turned the whole plant fibre thing on its head. These are people suffering the worst constipation, 70 patients suffering, straining when opening, bloating, anal bleeding, pain, pooing once a week, like chronic constipated people. And this is the average where they are. They're also, you can see with the symptoms, huge amount of constipation, difficult to poo, and some various issues. So then they said, okay, let's follow the NHS recommended, Finnish Department of Health recommended, CDC, more fibre is needed for these constipated patients. What happens when you measure it and put more fibre in? Symptoms get worse. The symptoms get worse the more plant fibre they eat, not better. And yet your GP is running around telling everyone you need more plant fibre for gut health. That's not what the studies show. I'm so surprised by that because I just assumed without seeing the study. So then they chop the fibre by half, and what happens? The fibre goes down. And then they thought, maybe plant fibre is the problem. How about we just shift into a carnivore diet? And what do you think happened to 70 worst constipated patients they could find? Everything went to zero. It's not a mistake. I didn't forget to put in bars there, as Paul Mason says. Everything went to zero on a carnivore diet. They chopped out plant ingredients completely, and all that constipation was sorted out. What? What have we been told? I was so staggered by that I could be so. You just accept stuff. It's just crazy. The patients who stopped, reduced their fibre, went from pooing from 4 times every 4 days to 1 day, very, very quickly. Very, very nice p-values there. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And he also explained this. He said, adding crude fibre to the diet increases the water content of your stool. No, it doesn't. No studies show that. Your body keeps your stool at 70 to 75%, a healthy patient. 70-75% water content in your stool, almost always, unless you have some sort of issue going on, a little bit of gut dysbiosis, a little bit of IBS, whatever's going on. But your body keeps the stool at around that water content. That's where it likes it. It's not excess water that plant fibre is adding to the stool. It's excess microbial mass. So around 25 to 55, a third to a half of your stool is bacterial dead bodies. So what do you think is going to happen if you feed that colon more and more plant fibre that you can't digest? You know who can digest it? All the bacteria in your guts, and they grow and grow and grow. More and more plant fibre, more and more poo, more plant fibre, more poo. I mean, does that sound like a good idea for someone who can't poo? As Paul Mason said, that is like this, It is putting more cars on the road, but you're trying to get them out a very narrow opening. And that is not going to work out for a constipated patient. So the idea that plant fibre helps with constipation is utterly incorrect in the majority of cases, which I thought was absolutely staggering. I can't believe I thought that. Absolutely doesn't relieve constipation. IBD, definitely not. Oh, sorry, plug there for DogRisk. I'm lacking my little Rory. Who was it in 23? What was that paper that you published in Nature? Anyway. This study showed raw-fed dogs have significantly less gut disease. Massive paper that you guys got out a couple of years ago. Fantastic. Into Nature, and you would think that every vet on the planet would go, oh, that's so interesting. So we know that actually cutting plant fibre down, at least getting them off kibble, there's a lot of factors that are going to be in there, I'm sure, but we know that raw food diets don't aggravate gut disease just because they don't have a heap of plant fibre. It's just not the case. It seems to be the opposite, but it hasn't been looked at yet. But they have done it in humans, and they know for sure that reducing fibre in IBD patients is a good idea. You've got to reduce plant fibre in patients with human patients with IBD. Restricting fermentable fibres led to significant improvements in gastrointestinal symptoms for IBD patients. And then the study concludes, as they always do. However, it's important to note that a low FODMAP diet, now FODMAPs is another type of fermentable, they call them fibres, they're not, but they're oligosaccharides, disaccharides, your lactose, monosaccharides, fructose, and then polyols and that kind of stuff, sorbitol, mannitol. You can't digest them at all. Your bacteria will do that. And so it's important to note that these things, while it's important when the patients have got IBD to remove that stuff from the diet, once they're better, what do? Put them back into the diet. Because they're so important for your digestive health. It's like, are you serious? Are they important? And then the patient will relapse, and then they'll take out the plant fibres because it aggravates IBD, and then as soon as the patient's better, dump back in the plant fibres again. Very interesting stuff, I thought. Improves colon cancer outcomes. No, it doesn't. Enormous meta-analysis. 750,000 people were followed for up to 20 years. And accounting for all other factors that you see there, high dietary fibre intake was not associated with a reduced risk of colorectal cancer. It's like, what? This is the whole reason we're eating plant fibre. We were told that Westerners are getting all sorts of cancers of the colon because they aren't pooing properly because of lack of plant fibre, and Burkitt said in Africa they get so much fibre that they don't get the same cancers we do. But Burkitt was just guessing. That's all. He'd no observable data, testable, repeatable data to back up that point, unbelievably. And then dopes like the Kellogg brothers who want to sell more cornflakes and grain and crap, all that money pours into the idea because the wheat and corn belt was coming on side in the US and they wanted to sell more junk food. And then they asked the seven-day evangelists, vegans, to create our food pyramid. A nonsensical idea that you put all these carbs on the bottom and then just above that, all that plant fibre and fruit and sugar, and then you get to the goodies at the top. If you turn that bloody thing upside down, you'd be healthier. And that's because you asked vegans and people like Kellogg Brothers and the whole industry and the USDA Department of Agriculture who want to sell more wheat and corn, fuel this. But it's not based on science or gut health. Absolutely not. So I thought that was very interesting. This is the message that we've been sold, but it's a pro-industry message. It's not a pro-gut health message at all. So very, very interesting stuff. Thanks again, Paul Mason, for those couple of tips. But here's where I leave Paul Mason. Paul Mason says you don't need fibre in the diet. That's not a direct quote of what he says. Maybe he says it in a more refined way, or maybe I just misinterpreted what he means. But I would say there is other types of fibre out there. So when you eat steak, you digest about 70-75% of it. A dog will digest about 80% of it. But the rest of that stuff that you can't digest is useful to somebody. Okay? It's in the back passage and you feed bacteria and they eat those hard to digest fibres. So we have whole systems built on eating fibre, but it doesn't necessarily have to be plant fibre. A lot of people would argue for more meat content in the diet. Probably one of the reasons that we came out of the trees and started roaming around lands and grew a brain so quick and hard to fuel it with ketones, and that comes from meat best and all that kind of stuff. So the meat fibre thing is very, very interesting. We never talk about meat fibre enough. And if you ask ChatGPT in all its wisdom, in terms of diet, what is fibre? Fibre refers to carbohydrates that humans can't digest, unlike sugars or starches. Plant fibre, it's all about plants. How much fibre in steak? There is essentially zero fibre in steak. So that's the start of my argument with ChatGPT. I will be there for an hour convincing it that it's wrong. And then I will say, well, how much of the steak can I digest? And on you go, down, down, down. And then eventually we get to the goodies, because there's loads of different types of meat fibre. Coming back to these two plant fibres. Does anybody know what the replacement for the top soluble plant fibre? You can see the gooey chia seeds. What does that look like to anybody? Does anyone know? Looks like bone broth. That bone broth is just dissolved soluble fibre. It's collagen, and gelatin, people, and different types of gloop. And we find that hard to digest, and so do dogs and cats, but bacteria love it. That's why it's so good for gut health. And the insoluble plant fibre, there's no point in even guessing. That sort of stuff. So there is animal fibre out there that easily replaces the plant fibres that don't come with all the hassle of being hard to digest, all the FODMAPs, and all the junk. The compounds that the plant is using to convince you not to eat it. They're not dummies. They're anti-nutrients, you know. Animal fibre doesn't come with those. So the whole prey feeders are onto something. I talked a bit of shit about them a few decades ago, but I'm coming back around to it because, you know, it's clearly the way these animals have lived. And dogs are whole prey eaters. Cats, a little bit more particular, dogs just eat the whole thing, okay? So everything in there is useful to the dog, and we've got loads and loads of studies of bone broth out there to show it's good for all sorts of things. A lot of studies in mice. Ulcerative colitis, happy enough with that. This is why it's so useful when you're treating dogs with gut conditions. This is how bone broth works. And it's all, everyone always just talks about collagen. Rats fed collagen from salmon skins, fish skins, exhibited major gains in beneficial bacteria, such as lactobacillus. I thought I had to drink kefir to get that. You know? Well, no, you can feed them collagen too, which is more appropriate probiotic for a dog. Along with elevated short-chain fatty acids. Lovely, I thought that just came from plant fibre, known to support gut health. Just 20 grams of collagen, like nothing, in overweight women reported improvements in bloating, gas, and overall digestive discomfort. Improvements in digestive comfort, yeah. Tiny little additions to your daily diet, which you get from just eating some more meat. More pollock skin studies. Okay, there's loads of them. There's another one as well on IBD in humans, which it's not there at the moment. It's anyway, it's always collagen, bone broth, but there's lots more to it than that. They're now starting to use or create canine probiotics based on collagen and gelatin and those sort of breakdowns. That's where probiotics are going for dogs. They're going to move away from talking about plant-based prebiotics and apple skins and all this sort of stuff, which probably have little benefits. Usually, those studies are produced by the manufacturers, and they're trying to sell you stuff. The reason you get probiotics made on lactobacillus and bifido is because they're the two bacteria that breathe oxygen. We can't make any other in the laboratory. So if you can make lactobacillus and bifido, they're the studies you're going to get because they're trying to sell you probiotics. And then you're just dumping in all lactobacillus and bifido all day into the dog. And it's like, these are anaerobic bacteria, you know? And you're just dumping in, there's 1,000 plumbers. We need an electrician. There's another 1,000 plumbers. You know? Anyway, I think canine probiotics are going to go the animal way. I'm not totally sold with the whole wolf probiotic. I just think that's a different animal. But there's probably something to it. I don't know a lot about it. But definitely canine probiotics in a year or two are all going to be animal fibre based, in my opinion. They're the only ones I'd use. There's loads of different types of fibres out there. Collagen is your gloop that you see in your bone broth. That's those cords, those springy cords. You can dissolve them. Okay, they're great. The elastin in the middle, the little meshy stuff, very hard to digest. Really tough stuff. So you've got collagen, and you've got your glucosaminoglycans, your chondroitin, and all that kind of stuff, all loved by your bacteria. Bone is in the middle, because it's, you know, you feed a bit of bone, the dog can't digest it all, doesn't need it all. So some bits are taken and absorbed, other bits add roughage to the stool. Dual function, lovely, and it's a mineral sink, fab. And then you've got insoluble fibres like keratin, almost impossible to digest. Cats can digest it really well. Cats can make fatty acids, butyrates, from when you feed them hair. So they can ferment hair and get fatty acids out of it. Unbelievable. So they've done studies on big cats to see what these indigestible animal fibres do to them. Chicken cartilage was quickest to ferment. Glucosamine chondroitin yielded the greatest gas volume because it's soluble fibre. You're feeding the bacteria just like plant fibre. Collagen yielded lots of good fatty acids, and collagen yielded the most butyrates. Rabbit hair, skin, and bone are poorly fermented because they're hard to digest insoluble fibres. And then she measured, Sarah DePaul then went on 2 years later to measure the health of the animals because kidney disease is a top killer of cats in the zoo. And they didn't realize that they were feeding them beef and bone and stripping the hide off the outside of the leg, usually horses or cows in the US, but horses in Dublin Zoo. And now they know to leave the hide on. They need more keratin and fibre and hairy bits and claws and teeth. And that kind of indigestible stuff really helps with the digestion in the cats, reducing all sorts of putrefaction compounds, uremic toxins that were killing the cats for want of this animal fibre in their diet. So, and in markers of intestinal inflammation. So these things are really beneficial for prey animals or for meat eaters. Cats can digest hair and get fatty acids out of it. It's unbelievable. Think how hard that is. So if we were to look at this graph again, digestion and nutrient absorption, meat beats the pants out of plant fiber, beats the pants out of it. Fiber gets in the way. Plant fiber gets in the way for these animals. The less of it in there, the better off your dog's going to be, as I showed you. Useful prebiotics for diarrhea cases. You know, soluble plant fiber is better than nothing if your pup has diarrhea. But why don't you feed them bone broth instead? They haven't done that study. Let's compare your, you know, chia seeds that you're going to do a study on and compare it to collagen. And who improves. Run 2 litres as opposed to 1. They haven't compared those two things, and I bet you the results will be better in the animal fed more appropriately, biological appropriate foods. Constipation, the less plant fibre, the better. IBD, and improved cancer outcomes. I'll just leave a question mark there, even though I suspect I know the answer. So meat beats the absolute pants off for all those things that you'll see the dry food companies pushing very, very hard. It's nonsense. It's not part of gut health. That's not why they're putting corn and wheat in there. It's nonsense. So as a final slide, I would like to kind of push on people that are pushing the message out there that dietary fibre should be defined by function, not by origin. And then that'll get rid of the whole plant fibre nonsense. Maybe a useful source of calories. You know, Mars bars are a useful source of calories, but they shouldn't be 50% of your diet. And the plant fibre might be useful for gut health. No, absolutely not in a meat eater. So that's useful. And the last little shout out here to manufacturers. We are the 80-10-10s that we're producing, the vast quantity of 80-10-10s we're producing, lack the indigestible animal fibers, okay? So, you know, my wife would be quite particular with the raw, you know, I'd be a little bit more, I don't mind the gore of it. Whereas Elaine would open it up and she'd go, oh, gross, you know, she feeds it with a long spoon. Now, if Elaine opened up the raw dog food and there was feathers and a foot hanging out of it, she'd barf, okay? It's seen as poor quality junk, you know, a tooth, you know. But what people don't understand is that some of this material is really, really important for dogs. And the vast majority of our 80-10-10s have it stripped out because you don't want to see little bits of feathers in there or animal hair or that kind of thing. So, you know, this is tricky for manufacturers, you know, to bring out a product and go, hey guys, we're putting in 2 to 3% animal hide in our products now. That's a tougher sell to people that don't understand raw feeding. So it's going to require us to talk about it a bit more, help the manufacturers out when they bring out one product and say, this is a bit more whole prey, this is like skin and hair. That is definitely how these dogs, these animals evolved. They need that material in their diet or they're going to suffer for the want of it. They'll still do a lot better than getting kibble. Clearly the studies show that. But I think an improvement could be made by really thinking about the animal fibre and like throwing them a rabbit ear now and again. No dog wants to just eat a rabbit ear. I mean, how many things have I offered Dudley like that? Just doesn't touch it. I'm not eating a rabbit ear. He's waiting for steak, you know. It needs to be incorporated into the diet a little bit to help with digestion for sure. So that's a tough one for manufacturers to make that leap, but they've done it before and they'll do it again. So I think that will be a very, very good idea. So I wanted to say thank you to Anna for bringing us up again this year. I love coming up here. Thanks to DogRisk for giving me a job. If I didn't have DogRisk, I wouldn't be able to do anything. That's the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society, open to everyone, vets, vet nurses, people that just have pets. There's the QR code. Join the gang. They're going to Mallorca this year. No offense, Helsinki's gorgeous as well, but you know, Spain sounds nice too. There's my website. And Raw Pet Medics, if you want to listen to us, me and 2 of the finest vets in the world talking stuff and me asking them questions, it's 7 p.m. British Standard Time on Facebook. Thanks very much.